everyone. Welcome to another edition of the GoodLife Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Blakely, and I am pleased to be joined by Katlynn Pyatt of Start Marketing Podcast. She's got a podcast called Start Marketing. Katlynn, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So let's get to know you a little bit. What books are you reading or listening to right now?
I am reading currently The Story Brand by Donald Miller, which
Great
is a
book.
super, marketing nerd explanation.
Yeah.
Been going through a bit of a rebrand process, so I felt like it's a good time. Otherwise, I'm kind of in between, I'm an avid reader. I'm a little bit in between. I like historical fiction.
Okay.
Kind of in between books right now. I'm trying to find the next one that I'm landing on.
Got it. Very good.
Yeah.
Building Story Brand. I actually got to see Donald Miller at a convention or a conference a couple years ago, and he's great.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
People, I know a lot of marketers who've gone to the Story Brand conference, and it's high on my list.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he does a great job.
cool.
How about podcasts?
Well, being a podcast host, I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
But I would say kind of my top two are also very marketing oriented. It's called Scratch by it's a relatively new agency called Rival. But it's a podcast host. His name is Eric Fulweiler. I followed him from a fintech marketing podcast over to this new one that he started. So a lot of CMOs, marketing execs who come in and kind of talk about the future of marketing, which is really interesting to me. And then my other favorite is marketing trends, because it keeps me up to speed, right?
Sure.
Keeps me relevant. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's just get into it. Tell us your story, being a podcast host, and just kind of your journey as a small business owner. Start from wherever you would like to, and just vision to reality, how things have shaped up for you.
Sure. I've had a very non-linear journey as an entrepreneur. In 2019, I had worked in financial marketing for probably 8 years or so.
Okay.
And I was just sort of getting restless in my career. I felt like I really love my boss and my job that I'm doing. I just felt like it's time for a change, but I didn't really know what I wanted that change to be.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I sort of had this personal revelation that I didn't want to just continue to run on the corporate hamster wheel.
Sure.
I had 2 little kids at the time, and I felt like I just always rushed through our mornings, and I was rushing them to get to school and to daycare, and then I'd go and I'd pour my heart into this job, and then I'd come home and I'd rush them through dinner and
Sure.
bedtime and just rinse and repeat.
Yep.
And I had 14 days a year that I could take off and spend time with them as human beings and just enjoy them and spend time with my husband. So I thought to myself, I really need some white space in my calendar. I want the flexibility to just be with my family when I want to. And so, those 2 time periods sort of collided, and my husband and I decided, he'd been advocating for me for a long time to go out on my own and start my own freelance consulting business. And so that was kind of the tipping point. And we started saving, and we said, I want to have 1 more kid, and then after that, that'll kind of be the time that we go out. So we started saving, and we find out we're pregnant with our 3rd in the fall of 2019. So we kind of set the fall of 2020 as the time, right?
Sure.
And then January of 2020 rolls around, and 5 months pregnant, I actually get laid off from my corporate job. And we looked at it and we said, we are a little shy of our goal, but we're just gonna go for it.
So that was May of 2020?
That was January of 2020. I was due. Yep, I was due in May of 2020, and we said, it's 9 months sooner than we really wanted it to, but we're gonna take the leap and go for it.
Okay.
So we did, and then March of 2020 hit.
Sure.
And here's COVID, which is by the way, if anybody is trying to start a business pre-global pandemic, horrible time to start a business.
Yeah.
So at that point, we kind of took a pause. I had a couple of clients. I had started my podcast, and we looked at it and we said, it really is not feasible for me as a super pregnant mom to be homeschooling a preschooler and a kindergartner. My husband still had to work. And we said, we're in a position where we are fortunate enough to have this money we've set aside. We're gonna take it and allow me to just be a stay-at-home mom.
Sure.
Like, I was still kind of working when I could, but there was no like sense of urgency.
Right.
And so I did that for about a year before all 30 kids were kind of back in school or daycare full time.
Yeah.
But then by that point, I was feeling like super stressed about our situation because while I wouldn't change the fact that I had gotten to stay home and like, you know, keep our kids home at a time that was like pretty scary. We had run out and we'd used all the money
Sure.
we had saved. And so this position came open. I was applying for gig work in between clients, and this position came across my desk one day, and it was almost exactly what I used to do in corporate marketing. So I thought, well, I'll throw my hat in, see what comes out of it. At the end of the day, if I don't take it, they don't want me, I'm no worse off than like where I am today.
Sure.
And I interviewed with two co-founders at this company called Payrex, and they were fantastic. I was so excited by the possibility of what I could do for them, and talked it over with my husband and decided, I'm going to take this director of marketing position. I said, I only want to work during school hours, and I'm fine giving up my client work, but I've got this podcast, and I have this idea for a community, and I really still want to be able to like do those things. So if you're cool with like, just school hours and me having this podcast, like sure, I'll come work for you. And they were, no questions asked, just kind of took me as I was, and they're still super supportive. And so that's kind of been my journey. I started there about a year ago, and it's kind of allowed me to step back from the client work that I was doing and really just focus on building my podcast and thinking about like creating a community around it and how it can really sort of fulfill the mission of making marketing more accessible and actionable for small business owners.
Yeah.
That's what I love to do.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So your small business journey took a little bit of a twist compared to what you thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we were talking before we hit record, but when you're a small business owner, you have an idea of how you want it to go.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's going to go that way. And so I think you've got a great story because it shows the importance of being able to pivot, to being open to other options, and just being ready to change if need be.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson that I took out of COVID. In my former life, pre-entrepreneur life, I would have clung very tightly. I'm a planner and an organizer. That's how I've made my career in marketing, is being really good at those things.
Sure.
And I would have previously just clung to this idea of I have this idea and I've mapped out a path to get there, and I have to just stay the course. I can't deviate. But I really learned that you kind of have to set these core tenets for yourself as an entrepreneur to say, this is what I value. So for me, it was that white space in my calendar. It was being able to do really amazing marketing. I just love to do marketing. And I like to build brands and strategies. So that's important to me. If I can do that professionally, I'm really happy. And then if I can help kind of teach my knowledge and help make somebody else's life really easy, that's also really important. So I really started to learn that if I frame my decisions around that, I can be really adaptable and I can change and adjust to the world around me without feeling like I've lost my sense of purpose or just kind of losing my cool and feeling like I'm failing at it. Because as long as those three things are kind of true for me, I'm kind of okay with how the journey starts to unfold. And I think, if COVID hadn't happened, if I hadn't been forced to sort of look at how am I going to get a business off the ground with little financial runway, I would have probably stuck to feeling like I've got to consult, I have to get clients, that's how I'm going to pay my bills, versus being able to look at the podcast community and look at that as like its own little entrepreneurial journey. There's tons of ways that you can build businesses around podcasts.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought about it if I had just sort of like clung to that idea and been like, this is what my journey has to look like.
Yeah.
And I just have to like stay the course.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a small business owner, I've said it before, but you know, COVID really showed how agile small businesses can be when they have to be. And I think it also opened up the opportunity for small businesses to think about things in a different way. And I think even consumers are more willing to adapt to, you know, different changes. Whether it's being more tech savvy, whether it's just being more understanding, you know, it just kind of changed the perspective for everyone.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of COVID, what was it like for you, you know, during that time where you're trying to get clientele, you're starting to, you know, get your podcast going, you're trying to teach kids at home. Do you think that just, did it add more stress? Was it something that actually looking back on it that maybe you embraced a little bit and are happy things went the way they did?
That's a good question. I mean, I think in hindsight, I am happy with the way things went. I couldn't see the end going through it, right?
Sure.
Like, I just sort of had to kind of keep the faith that like something was gonna work out and it was gonna be fine. You know, my husband and I were really like privileged to be in the position we were when COVID started, to say like, we're going to, like, we get to make decisions around what we think is the best for our kids and their safety versus like out of necessity.
Yep.
Like, there are a lot of people, obviously, that had to say like, you know what, even though I don't feel like it's safe for my kid to be in daycare, I have to go to a job. And so, like, my hands are just tied. And we obviously like had the financial freedom to be able to do that. And I could have looked at it, and I think some days I looked at it at like the expense of me building my business, and so that stung a little bit. But that was what allowed me to kind of, again, really evaluate like what's important to me. And I just kind of kept those three things in mind and just kept reminding myself that like as long as I ended there, as long as I was happy with those three things, it didn't really matter like how it came together.
Sure.
But it was absolutely stressful. Like, there were months at a time where, you know, like I maybe worked a few hours because that's all I had. You know, it's not possible to be a full-time parent and a full-time professional in any capacity for someone or for yourself, and, you know, homeschool and parent and build businesses or do any sort of professional work. So it was stressful, but, you know, hindsight's always 20/20. It worked out the way that it should have. So I just remind myself to be grateful about that.
And if you're happy with the results, I mean, how things, you know, you got what you wanted out of it. I mean, that's awesome.
And I think it's more than a lot of people can say. And so that does not escape me on a daily basis. And I kind of think back on my own journey, and it definitely keeps you humble when you think about how different things could have been. And so just reminding yourself that, like, you know, out of something that was really very scary and very trying for a lot of people, like, we came out, I feel like, ahead, and that's not something that a lot of people can say.
Absolutely. So you got a unique perspective as opposed to other guests that I've had, from the clients that you have worked with, and kind of what you do as far as a small business owner and kind of building their business. And so just kind of talk about your strategy and, you know, your perspective on, enlighten us on some things maybe as small business owners or anyone that's listening, that angles they can take, strategies that they can take, that, you know, you would recommend.
So coming into building my own business and like as a marketer who knows how to market a business and, you know, drive results and things like that, I kind of naively came into my own business thinking that I had like the upper hand because I know how to play the game. But knowing how to play the game doesn't mean that the rules don't apply to you, right? And so there's kind of two things that small businesses need in order to grow their business, right? It's influence or income. You have to have one of those two things in order to do marketing so that you can actually drive leads and make, you know, have them convert and make sales. And that was kind of the gap that I aimed to fill when I started out. You know, when I was a corporate marketer, I could sit at the table with an agency. I had almost $2 million in budget, so I could look at a project and go, yeah, I've got $50,000 to spend on that. That's fine. We can do that. And as I started to think through it from like a small business owner's mindset and thinking about myself going into that situation, I kept thinking like, there's no way. I don't have $50,000 sitting in a bank that I can just throw at marketing, you know? And so I kept thinking like, how am I gonna do this? And so that's where like my mission and kind of like what started driving me really came from, is because I kept sitting there thinking like, this is why small businesses are at a disadvantage, right? You don't get to come to an agency with a big business budget. You have to come with, you know, maybe the $2,000 that feels like a lot of money to you. And then you've got an agency tell you that's not enough. That's like a drop in the bucket to work with them. So you're sort of stuck figuring it out yourself. And so a lot of small business owners, you know, their first stop is social media. And they go, well, it's free. So that's what I'm gonna do. And social media is like the hardest way to market your business as a small business owner. You're fighting against algorithms that reward people with big budgets. And if you don't spend the money, you've got to focus on content creation. And if you were a big business that wanted to focus on content creation, you would have at least one full-time person, if not a whole team, and probably an agency that kind of supplements the work that your team is doing to create enough content to grow organically. So it's sort of like we're just tying the hands of these small business owners. And so what I like to do is to be able to say there are other options aside from social media. It's not a one-size-fits-all opportunity, right? When it comes to marketing, you have to understand who is my target audience and where can I find my target audience and where does that intersect with my capacity and my capabilities as a small business owner. So you've sort of got all these moving parts and pieces, and my goal is to kind of help people bring them together to say, so that's what I try to do on my podcast. I focus on the access. Here's the marketing strategy, and here's what it should be doing for your small business. You know, there's all of these other things outside of social media. There's Google My Business. There's Pinterest, which is actually more like a search engine versus a social media platform. You have email marketing. You have all these ways, referrals, that you can get leads for your business. You can create awareness and help drive growth. Social media isn't the only place. So let's get you access, help you understand what those are from experts, and then let's focus on the action part. How can we break this down so that it's not overwhelming? Like if I told you to go out and start, you know, growing your email list so that you could grow your podcast, like if you don't have experience in email marketing, you're gonna sit there like a deer in headlights and be like, that's cool, I guess I'll go Google that and try to figure it out. And so really kind of breaking it down and helping streamline that and say, like, focus on these first few steps. Like we're just gonna put our blinders on and focus on these 2 steps, and then we'll worry about growing it and adding on the next big thing,
There's a lot of different ways to grow an email list. I mean, and that's what you can be overwhelmed with options. Where someone like you can give advice, okay, these are the steps that you need to take.
And really So focusing on and helping people understand, like, marketing should be a business strategy for you, right? If you think about your business as a whole, marketing isn't like this separate piece of the puzzle, right? It is part of the foundation, it's the cornerstone of your business, and there are a lot of other things that tie into, leads and sales. It's the experience when somebody gets to the point of sale. It's the product, it's the service, your operation. There's so much. Marketing is part of a business strategy. So what it should do is support your business. It shouldn't be taking time, energy, and money away from your business. It should be an investment. And so helping small businesses understand and think about it from that perspective versus, I just need someone to run Facebook ads for me. You might legitimately need Facebook ads, but what is your goal with those? What do you need to accomplish? How is that going to support your business? And a lot of times, people don't necessarily know. It's just, again, everybody else is doing it. It seems like, it's the thing for small businesses to do. So really helping people understand and teach them about marketing so that you can confidently say, this is what I'm going to do. I have a plan. I understand how it's going to contribute to the success of my business. And it doesn't feel like I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping that something sticks, or beating my head against the wall, like trying to keep up with social media. When, like, if you don't have a strategy behind social media, again, you're just wasting your time with it. So it's kind of where I try to focus people. And so that's kind of the point of my podcast. And then I'm in the process of launching a community that small business owners can join, where you continue to kind of build off of some of the things that I do on my podcast. Like, once a month I have a small business owner come on and I do like a coaching session with them. They bring their marketing challenge and we just kind of break it down and figure out how would you tackle it, what are some ways that you could go about this. So kind of building on some of those things in the community. And like, again, I have a lot of access to marketing knowledge and other marketing experts. So if you do need somebody to do X, Y, or Z marketing strategy for you, let me at least get you to someone reputable that's not going to take advantage of you, that's going to help you move the needle. So that's kind of the goal of how it all starts to kind of come together.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like when you're starting as a small business, it's difficult to say, okay, here's my target market, because when you're starting from scratch or starting with very little, your target audience is everybody. I mean, you want to get everybody in that you can, or get as many customers as you can, and so that's maybe something that people don't focus on when they're starting a business. But from what your advice, it's really something that needs to be one of the first things there. It needs to be part of your plan before you open. To know, obviously you want to bring in as many clients as you can, but there needs to be a niche or a certain market that you go after.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, when people come to me and they'll say like, well, what should I be doing to market my business? The first thing I'm going to do is say, well, let's take a step back. Tell me about who your target audience is. Because if you don't know who your target audience is, or if you say, my target audience is anyone, okay, well, how are you going to market to everyone? Do you have the time and the resources to market to everyone? And if you think about yourself from a consumer standpoint, you respond to messages that feel like they resonate with you, that like somebody is speaking to you and kind of intimately knows the problem or the challenge that you're having, right? So you have to start, even with marketing, you have to start with that target audience and understand. And I promise, even on the outside, if it seems like, my product could be for anyone, there's still niches in there. And in the example that I'll give, I recently did a coaching session with a gal named Clarissa from 70 Ranch, and they sell whole hogs and whole cows. So on the outside, food seems like it's for everyone.
Yeah.
Which it is. But who's buying from you? And we kind of, dug down deep in there. Well, it's moms, it's women who are trying to kind of meal plan and feel like they're giving their family a little bit healthier option, more organic option potentially than what they're getting from the grocery store. Okay, well, let's focus our time and energy on finding more moms who fit that description. So there's always a way to kind of like narrow your focus. And it's really important to have that focus because that's going to give you the clarity that you need in order to make informed decisions, both in your marketing but also in your business, right? Because that'll influence in your purchase decisions, it'll influence partnerships, all these things that you do as a business should be driven by your target audience because you want to connect with them.
Sure.
It's just impossible to be all things to all people. Yeah. You have to pick a priority.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that can be comforting too. I talk to business owners that, they want to be better at marketing and they're looking at it from the social media side. And maybe they beat themselves up because they're not doing it on a consistent basis or they don't think they're doing enough or whatever. So I think that, it's comforting to hear, hey, maybe social media isn't something that you should be doing. Maybe it is an email list. Maybe it's, doing a blog post to share your knowledge or doing something different than just social media. That may not be where you need to go. It might be, and it might be on a smaller scale. Maybe once you figure out that market that you're going after, that's where you can kind of target your social media, but it doesn't have to be as broad as what you're trying to make it. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's great advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk about, this will be a little bit of a surprise question, but just talk about, like, from a business owner standpoint, talk about podcasts and how that can kind of be even a different medium for the message you're trying to get across, or people that think that that maybe a podcast isn't an avenue for them.
Sure.
I really enjoy doing podcasts. Obviously, you do too. Just kind of talk about that side of it for a small business owner.
Yeah. So the thing with starting a podcast and how you want to think about it on the onset is, like, how is this going to support my business?
Right.
Podcasting, just like any other type of marketing, takes time and energy to do and to do it well. And so you kind of want to understand, what does this need to do for my business? For me, it creates awareness, right? It creates awareness that I have a community. It creates awareness that I work with clients. So you really want to understand and start there. Podcasting sounds really intimidating from the outside. You and I talked about this when you first got here, but once you technically figure out, like, hey, I need a place to host it, I need a microphone, and I need to kind of like understand the structure of my podcast, then you can get going relatively easily with it. At the end of the day, what you're doing there is trying to establish yourself as an expert. You're trying to establish thought leadership. And this isn't any different than like blogging. It's the audio form of blogging.
Right.
So your goal here is really just to kind of help people get to know you and understand your philosophy. I'll give an example. Eric Fullweiler, the podcast host of Scratch that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, when I first started my director of marketing job, I had no idea. I had zero clue about how to do marketing for fintechs. It was totally new to me. So I used his podcast as like a crash course to learn how to do marketing in the fintech space. And then when he moved over and he started Scratch, I followed him over and I continue to use his expertise to kind of help shape me as a marketer, right? And when the time came for me to look for an agency to help do marketing, communications, and strategy and support me, he was the first person I went to because I thought, like, this guy knows what he's talking about. For a year, I've been listening to him, so I really know his philosophy as a marketer, as a communicator, and it aligns with my own philosophies. And And so that's kind of a broad goal as a podcaster, is to be able to say, like, how can I sort of position myself as an expert so that when the time comes, someone feels really comfortable coming to me because they understand my philosophies. And from there, you can kind of start to move people down through a sales funnel. But it's a great opportunity. Podcasting is growing a ton. For the first time ever, podcasts in 2022, end of 21, were considered mainstream media.
Yeah.
They tipped over into something that Nielsen, which kind of measures media and tells marketers where to buy their advertising, said podcasts are considered mainstream now.
Yeah.
And so it's a great opportunity for you to, put your thoughts and ideas out there. They're one of the hardest things to grow, I think. That's good news for you as a small business owner when you're starting, because having a small audience or no audience means you can fumble around, you can make the mistakes and learn as you go.
Yeah.
And nobody's looking at you going well, this isn't what I expected. You kind of get a fumble your way through until you find a groove, and then about that time is when people start, to find you and pay attention.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a good little opportunity, I think, but not to be underestimated.
It's really no different than, if you're going to do social media, you're going to have to grow that audience, and it's going to take time. And podcasting is no different. Can you hit, I guess what in air quotes overnight success? Yeah, you probably could. And I think the other part of it too is, don't overlook the fact that you can do some research by finding different podcasts that are out there in your field or something that you're interested in, or kind of where you want your market to be. And sending an email or a message to the host, that doesn't hurt. If you don't want to start your own podcast, but you think that you've got some knowledge to share, promote yourself on someone else's podcast. As a host, I'm looking for people all the time that can come on and share their knowledge. So take some time to do some research. Find a podcast that's out there that maybe you could contribute to, and that's just going to help you grow your brand too.
Yeah, absolutely. I just in February I just did an episode, a couple of episodes about how to and why podcast guesting is can be a really great marketing strategy for you. For all of the reasons you just said, it's something that podcast hosts are looking for, and if you've got a unique perspective, it takes some time to pitch yourself, but you can borrow someone else's audience. They've already done the hard work of building that up and getting a lot of eyeballs on their content, so you sort of get to benefit from their hard work. But you're adding something. You have something of value to add. They're bringing a unique perspective on whatever subject you're the expert on. So podcasts, I think, are a really unique opportunity. I think people are hopping on them a lot now. I get pitched probably 2 or 3 times a week with guests, but I'm starting to see in my marketing networks, they're asking about hey, what about podcast advertising? Is anybody here in podcast advertising? What about sponsors and all? So it's starting when marketers start to take notice. That's kind of a little clue that it's worth looking into, and it doesn't cost you anything to be on a podcast except your time. So that's something. It's a great free strategy if it's something you want to pursue, but it's a good option.
And it's out there it's out there forever. As long as the host keeps it up there, people can find your podcast 2 years after you do it, and it's a great. We were talking before, it's not an audiobook that's 6 hours long, but it's not a snippet on social media, but you really get, it's a long form type of media where you can really talk about you can talk about your strengths, and just help educate people, and it's free to them. So
it is really truly a great option. So you just you've got to look for and do your due diligence, find things that are, a good fit, make sure that you are a gracious guest.
Sure.
That comes with, information to share. But yeah, it's something that I really hadn't looked into or thought about before I started my business. I started my podcast on a recommendation of my business coach.
Sure.
No strategy behind it whatsoever. But over time, it's just grown, and it's something that I really love doing. And aside from that, even if you don't get a ton of publicity from it, what I have found is that I make more connections with people. My network has grown exponentially since I started podcasting because of the people that I interview, because of the podcasts I go on. And that is actually more valuable than any of the publicity that I've gotten from my podcast episodes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, a tangential benefit, and networking and building a network is sort of like a sneaky marketing strategy that people don't really consider.
Yeah,
but it's probably one of the most valuable things you can do as a small business owner to grow your or not just your podcast, but to grow your business, just to build that network of people who can make referrals to you.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You start a small business and there's that laser focus that you have where it just there's that period of time where it just kind of consumes you. Everything going on in your head is about your small business, and you kind of laser focused on how you're going to do things. But you need to remember that building a network, making connections, there's a lot of people out there, even if they're doing the same type of business that you are, that want to help you succeed. And if you get in touch with the right people, lean on them. And they will help you, and it'll make, down the road, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So 100%. Yeah, absolutely. What's one piece of advice that you would give yourself if you could go back to when you started your business? Or would you just let things play out as they have?
I think I would tell myself to go back and do more market research than I did. I talked to kind of a small group of people. I think I would have expanded that. I would have, aimed for maybe double or triple the number of people that I talked to, just to kind of understand a little bit better. There's so many insights that I gathered over time. Could have saved me a little bit of the whiplash I feel like I experienced. But I also would have told myself to kind of go back and be a better student of people who were doing what I wanted to do successfully, and try to kind of learn from and reverse engineer them. Again, I came in sort of naively thinking that because I knew how to market products and services, that this was going to be like sort of breezy.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was a humbling moment, kind of that realization. So just like I, crash coursed myself in fintech marketing when I started there, I tell myself go back and do the same thing with small business, because there's so much more to understand outside of just like what's my business strategy or my product offering or my pricing strategy. I had no idea that like the average marketing freelance business takes 5 to 7 years to get to the point where it's like sustainable. Well, even the 1.5 years that I had in, saved up, not necessarily enough to get you, so things like that. I would have told myself to be a better student, I think. Yeah.
I have learned that there is not much else in life that will humble you like starting a business. Because, I'd been an insurance agent for 5 years before, and I thought it would not be that difficult, and it was tough. And so, it's never as easy as you think it's going to be, but that's kind of part of where you can grow in those moments where it's like, okay, I just got kicked down pretty hard, but I'm going to keep going and fight through and get better and learn. Absolutely. Someone comes to you and they say, I'm going to start a business. What's one piece of advice you would give them?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it would be to go out and find and try to make connections with the entrepreneurs or people who are running their kind of the business that you see yourself getting to, because there's so much knowledge you can get from learning from those people. You have to find the right one. Some some entrepreneurs are like very guarded because, you know, they view it as competition. But if you can find the people who want to share their experience and their knowledge, find them and build relationships with those people, because they're going to be the ones that know that there's enough pieces of pie to go around for everyone, and who are going to be generous with their knowledge, and you can kind of, you're not going to skip the learning curve, but you're going to, you know, maybe have some foresight into some of those challenges, those knocks that are eventually going to come and push you over. And I think that would be the piece of advice, is to find those people and, you know, treat them well and cultivate that relationship, and be generous with what you have to give. The more generous you are, even when you are starting out and it doesn't feel like you have a lot to offer people, the more generous you are with your knowledge, your expertise, and the resources you do have, that will always come back to you. And the more you guard it, the harder it's going to be for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people out there that are more than willing to help. I think it goes both ways. There's people that have done, you know, if you find someone that's done your type of business and they've been doing it for 10 years, they remember what it's like to be in your shoes. At the same time, they've maybe gotten comfortable with where they're at, and so some of the new ideas or innovations that maybe you want to start out with your business, that can help them, and so you can work together, and it's huge.
Absolutely.
One other question. You know, you talked about you and your husband putting savings aside. It sounds like you got someone that has been there to help you through starting your business, has given you advice, and has just been there as a support system. I think it's huge for people that are married. You and your spouse need to be on the same page in a lot of ways, but you need someone to hug you when you've had a bad day and kick you out of bed the next day when you don't want to go to work. And just talk about that a little bit of you know, how important it is to have that support.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate. My husband has been like the biggest supporter. He told me for years before I said I'm ready to start a business that he thought I should start a business. So he believed in it before I ever did.
Sure.
He has like this entrepreneurial spirit that I like have learned through osmosis from him. And I'm also very fortunate that he really enjoys like planning our finances and stuff like that. So he was the one who like got super jazzed, and he did the hard work of saying like, okay, here's where I think we need to be financially. But we had a lot of like very frank and honest conversations about like, this is the timeline, this is what we're going to save for, this is the timeline, and you know, and of course like things change, and when they did, we had to continue having that conversation. And there were days when it was hard. It was hard to hear like, hey, you know, like the day he was like, you know, he's like, I don't want to stress you out more, but like we're at the point now where we're just breaking even. We've used our overflow. He was like, we're fine, but I think we've got about 6 months before like things really start to get rocky. Like those are hard conversations to have, but it always came from a place of love. And you just have to have those conversations. You know, like he kind of took care of and said like, hey, I will keep an eye on like the big picture, and I will let you know. And then he stepped out of the business stuff. He didn't meddle in like, how are you spending the money that you've earned, none of those things. He trusted me to make the decisions I needed to make. But you know, having that support there, and just collectively knowing like where we wanted to end up and why made all the difference in, you know, starting, adapting, changing, putting it to the side, if we weren't on the same page, that would have just been a stressor. I think that would have like bled into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. I don't think you realize how every day is stressful, but to have that support where it's like, okay, at least I got this, it's huge. It's huge. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where can we find the podcast?
Yeah, I am the Start Marketing Podcast. I'm on all the major podcast platforms. But you can go to my website, getauthenticbranding.com, and at the top there's a link to the podcast. You can find it there and listen.
We'll have a link in the show notes for that.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Caitlin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, appreciate you taking the time, sharing your knowledge. I think there's a lot that small business owners can get out of this, different perspectives, and so I appreciate it.
Awesome. Of course. Thank you.